welcome to today, which is a kind of a follow-up because we talked ourselves into a submission at the last meeting and never got everything done. Today's meeting is live webcast, recorded, available. Please be present in the meeting and turn your phone onto silent, which I shall do now because it wasn't. Attendance by electronic link, I'm approving Councillor Williamson, who has COVID. And so he's online, I hope. And yes, there he is. What a handsome devil. Apologies, none received at this stage. There should be some for lateness because I can see.
We've got some for lateness. We've got Councillor Baker for lateness on council business, Councillor Fletcher and Councillor Newman.
Oh, they're good. Okay, they're just late. In favour? Move. Contrary? Thank you. Accepted. Righto, there we are. Non-agendas, none known. Referred. Righto. 4.1 is the first thing there, and this is referred from the regulatory and safety one. This is about a couple of things. I think I'll let Councillor Bartley move this, and I think Councillor Gillen wants to second this, if that's okay. Councillor Bartley, would you like to introduce this item, please?
Thank you, Your Worship. Today we're bringing you proposed bylaw improvements following a statutory review of our navigation and health and hygiene bylaws. The reviews help us check that the bylaws are still necessary and working as intended. The navigation bylaw focuses on keeping people safe on the water, while the health and hygiene bylaw protects people using services like tattooing, laser treatments and acupuncture. We're recommending that both sets of proposed updates go out for public consultation. The aim is simply to modernise the rules and make them clearer. Some of the key changes to the navigation bylaw include requiring people to wear life jackets on small vessels when they are moving to reduce fatalities, updating legacy mooring licences to current requirements, adding new restricted areas and removing rarely used access lanes. For the health and hygiene bylaw, we propose to add new rules for sacrification to prevent serious harms while removing rules for lower risk services like exfoliation and manicures, requiring all providers to be qualified, hygienic and verify any injectable products are safe, restricting removal of skin lesions to health practitioners who continue to be exempt from the bylaw. If adopted, consultation would run from 4 May to 7 June, followed by consideration of public feedback, local board input and Māori views by a bylaw panel. Final decisions would come back to the governing body later this year. The bylaw panel members are Councillor Alf Filipaina and Councillor Matt Winiata. We're happy to answer any questions you have, but I also like to acknowledge the bylaws team for their work on these issues. They're significant issues that we have received lobbying about over the years from communities, from organisations, and I also acknowledge Councillor Alf Filipaina for his advocacy and leadership in the with the Coast Guards and the water safety prevention sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Staff, if you want to add to that?
No, nothing to add.
Okay, I think it's reasonably clear in the paper. Is there any further discussion, questions? Councillor Patterson-Hamlin.
Just a really quick part, would that be general consultation or targeted?
Through the chair, it's both. So we do general initiatives and targeted ones as well to raise awareness and enable that people have an opportunity to have their say.
I have no further questions. It appears as though that you guys can retire and we'll see if there's any further discussion, or otherwise I'll put it. Councillor Foley would like to discuss something, please.
Sorry, Chair, I did want to make a comment to acknowledge a couple of people, but I guess the so I'll make that after during the debate part. But just a question, if you could outline for us, and I know our community is listening, because I know you've got some planned consultation for our tufunga, our traditional Samoan tattoos. If you could just outline a little bit of that for the public who are listening. Kia ora.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor. As well as the general consultation, so the public notification, we'll be working with local board engagement advisors to notify communities, and with the tufunga and the advisors that we've used to do our pre-consultation or our gathering feedback on the rules. Thank you. I'll pass back to you, Mr. Mayor.
I have no further questions, so if you guys like to just retire. Sorry for bringing you along there for no questions, but it must have been a good, clear paper. Councillor Fuller, you'd like to have a comment?
Kia ora, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity. I just wanted to acknowledge a couple of key people who've been involved with this work for a very long time, and Councillor Bartley's acknowledged Councillor Al Filipaina for his long-standing work with the navigation bylaw. But I did want to also mention former Otara Papatoe local board member, the late Tunu Mafono Awawhaamoe, who really kicked this off almost a decade ago now, I think. And sadly we lost him last year, but I know that he would be really excited to see how far the work that he started to get life jackets as something that you have to use on our boating vessels. That's a really big issue in our Pacifica community for our people who go out onto the water. So I'm really happy to see that it's gotten to this point now with the new amendments or the new suggested improvements to the bylaw. And then for the health and hygiene bylaw as well, I wanted to acknowledge Sauni Ma'a, Josephine Sasa, who has really driven it from the health and hygiene area, because she's doing her PhD specifically looking at health and hygiene to do with tattooers, to keep our tattooers, our tufunga safe, but also to keep our people safe who get their tatau in that traditional way. So just wanted to acknowledge and thank them all for their work in this space. Kia ora.
Thank you for that. I might just mention that I think it's quite good to see the leg rope things has come alive as an option for saving lives as well as life jackets. And I did mean to ask that the acupuncture thing is largely a very Chinese sector of the population, and I have had some acupuncture, and the lady who did it didn't speak a word of English. So how are we going to communicate with those people? I should have asked as a question, but would you like to come forward and answer that? How are we going to discuss acupuncture if we just speak in English? Because I know nothing about tattoo, so I'm not going to comment on that. But
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have Jonathan Hamlin here from Licensing and Environmental Health to help with this question as well. The first thing would be that only any acupuncturist or Chinese medicine practitioner who's registered with the Chinese Medicine Council is exempt from the bylaw. So we would only be talking about potential unlicensed, licensed acupuncturists who are not registered with the council. So it's a very small number of acupuncturists. But I'll pass to Jonathan to talk about the communication issue.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. So I'm one of the environmental health officers out doing the inspections. We're quite lucky in our team to have such a wide variety of people and our officers, so we usually use them if there's a communication issue. So I'll take one of my colleagues with me. But when we're doing the inspection, it's a lot of demonstration. So even if there is communication issues, we can still normally get to the end result by the end, using our colleagues and using our skills as EHOs to get them to demonstrate how they do things. Thank you.
back with that. Okay, thank you for that. Yeah, thank you, Senator. I have no further questions, so it's been moved and seconded, so I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. The contrary, that's carried. We'll move to item 4.2, which is the direction on progressing local board reorganisation for the 2028 elections. I think there's some staff coming forward for that. Staff have looked at this after workshopping with us and the local boards and come to the conclusion there isn't really a case to do a reorganisation this term in order to spend money on it. So thank you to Carol and Oliver. They don't look like Carol and Oliver to me, but still, for their work on this, and I'll hand over to them to talk to the to their recommendation. I think filling up the buses with diesel is probably a little bit more important for a spend this year than talking about a local board re-election, but there you go.
Thank you, Your Worship. So this report provides feedback from local boards on whether or not we should go ahead with the local board reorganisation. Following December's GB resolution, boards were asked to provide feedback on matters, issues or opportunities that a reorganisation could address, whether the board supported going ahead, and if yes, whether that should be led by the Local Government Commission or carried out in-house. The feedback we received did not show strong support for reorganisation, but that if we were to go ahead, the preference was to ask the LGC to lead this. Some boards identified areas that would benefit from being investigated, generally areas of high growth, where some consideration is needed on where communities of interest best lie, for example, Milldale or Drury. Other boards thought it was better to work through other changes first that are already being considered, such as fairer funding and transport reform. Many boards wanted to ensure that when a review does take place, it looks at both the GB representation as well as the local board reorganisation. There were also a few matters that raised that would be managed through a representation review instead. Advice from the LGC is that the reorganisation should take place prior to a representation review to ensure alignment of wards and boards where possible. So overall, staff did not feel there was enough support from boards to go ahead this term, but feel that this should go ahead as per the Local Government Commission recommendation prior to our next representation review, which is due to take place next term. Thank you.
I don't have any questions about this one. Oh, Councillor Gillen.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions. The first one is that we need to legally do a representation review in the next 6 years since the last one. So will you be putting forward as part of the LTP planning a budget in there to ensure that we do actually front foot it?
Yeah, yes, we can do that. Yeah.
Thank you. My second question is that you've said that there doesn't seem to be a support from the local boards to progress with this. However, my reading of their feedback in the report is that actually a majority do want to do it. They just don't want to review local boards in isolation. They actually want a wider review of the governing body and other aspects of council, much of which would actually be included if we were to do a reorganisation and a representation review. Would that be correct?
Yes, that's correct. The board also raised further governance issues relating to the shared governance model, decision-making, allocation, resourcing, and representation. However, these concerns sit outside the statutory scope of a local board reorganisation under the Local Government Act Schedule 3A.
Or they fall under the representation review?
Sorry?
They would fall under a representation review?
Yeah.
So just to clarify, more boards did not support going ahead with the reorganisation this term based on the feedback, but there were quite a few who did talk about that wider scope, and some of those were clear that it should be both. So there's, I'd say, in balance, less supported going ahead this term than did. Yeah.
Councillor Watson, please.
Yes, I just want to pursue that notion a little further. Point 8, 4 boards support a local board reorganisation, 14 call for a wider scope governance review that includes the governing body and local boards. So there obviously is a bit of a groundswell for doing something, and I guess I'm not quite sure what form the feedback took, but when I look at the hibiscus and bays one that you've included here, they're quite specific, and I'd imagine that would be the tenor of some of the rest of them. So I guess that section 3A, Schedule 3A, it does provide quite a bit of scope, doesn't it, as articulated here?
Yes, part of it. So Schedule 3A provides opportunity to amalgamate, for example, amalgamate local boards or to do any major boundary adjustments.
Yeah, so establishing, abolishing, amalgamating boards. I guess to cut to the chase, and some of the councillors have been around for a little while, you know, be aware of the Royal Commission recommendation back in 2009, which had quite a lot of support around Auckland, and they came up with a very specific recommendation, which, you know, looking in retrospect, I think would have worked a lot better, but leave that aside. What ability is there to come up with a version of that of our own volition? So, for instance, and I'm looking at 3A here, basically establishing, to an extent abolishing and amalgamating. We're looking to do that where you come up with a version of their, and just for argument's sake, it could be anything, but say 6 or 7 local councils that amalgamate the local boards into that that format that the Royal Commission were keen to proceed with. Does 3A allow that type of reorganisation?
So just to be clear, the reorganisation approach that we can do under 3A can look at those boards, can look at the size of the boards, can look at how we kind of set them up based around communities of interest. If we want to reflect back to the feedback we got from local boards through this engagement, the questions were more around things like, how does the allocation of decision making work? How does the budget management work? How does the shared governance model work? In general, that can't be considered under a local board reorganisation. So is it that we want to look at a structural issue, or do we want to look at this at a governance level? We were aware that there's a lot going on in this space around the governance framework review. So there are things happening already around fairer funding, trying to look at the support that has been provided to local boards, but that can't be dealt with under the mechanism of the Schedule 3A. That's only the structural matters around where the board boundaries would be.
So I guess in pragmatic terms then, so you couldn't just say, for instance, amalgamate all the northern boards and make them, instead of call them a local board, call them a local council. I mean, it's semantics. So you're saying you couldn't do that under this reorganisation?
We could change them into one large local board under this mechanism, but it doesn't necessarily change the decision-making allocation and how the shared governance model is applied. That's something that needs to be dealt with separately.
Okay, so even though we're looking to increase local boards' decision-making, we say we're looking to give them more delegations, so you're saying that would have to occur outside of this process. So, but the two could happen in conjunction, couldn't they? Yeah. Okay, I'll speak to this, Mr. Mayor, at the right time. Yeah.
Thank you for that. I don't have any other questions. So you guys retire, please, and we'll have a debate about this if anyone wants to debate it. We've been flogged to death as far as I'm concerned. And I'm glad it died. Councillor Foley, you wish to say something?
Kia ora. Thanks, Chair, and thanks, team, for all of the work. I'm going to be supporting the recommendation not to go ahead with the reorganisation, but I just did want to highlight some of the feedback that we got from our local boards in South Auckland, and specifically from our 2 local boards in the Manukau ward. And they were against the reorganisation, but they did want to highlight that there are things of more pressing priority for us as a governing body, as a council, and as a city. In particular, they wanted us to use our priorities for and our resourcing to restore electoral integrity, to restore public confidence in local government, but also in in the electoral system, because that's taken a bit of a hit in South Auckland with the by-election happening, for example. Also addressing the local board funding shortfalls and the pressure that local boards are feeling out there to look at their programs line by line in order to meet those shortfalls. And of course, frontline services. There's an ask in there from the two local boards to put more of our resourcing towards that. And they say that's a better use of the money that would have gone towards this reorganisation. And just to end off, I think the Mangere o Tahu local board said, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Kia ora. Thank you.
Councillor Watson, please.
Yeah, thanks. So I think this is a little bit of a missed opportunity here, really, because my reading of the feedback here is that probably the local boards lacked a bit of direction in their feedback, but obviously, you know, there are concerns there for supported the reorganisation and Fording looking to widen the scope, and that comes off the back of some things that have been around for a long while, and which basically go to the structure and the organisation of local boards as they stand at the moment. So we just had an election where there was a 29% turnout, so there's, you know, things going on to address that I think we all know in our heart of hearts aren't going to result in too much of a dramatic change. But one of the consistent threads, in my view, certainly in the area I represent, but across Auckland as a whole, is a kind of lack of identity with the area people are in and are represented for, and many people are still caught in the mindset of the legacy councils as far as the areas, and there's a lot of geographic logic and historical logic to that. So we're kind of just soldiering on, despite the fact the structure, you know, despite some of the tinkering with it, it hasn't fundamentally changed. We had a lot of very harsh criticism at the time that came out, and that criticism proven to be correct. And over the passage of time, Professor Shirley was a professor of public policy at AUT University, and he referred to the current organisation as being a kind of corporatised one, and that would not gain the trust of ratepayers. And in referring to the local boards, he said the current prescriptions for these boards and the minimal allocation of support services make it clear that the boards will be largely irrelevant in decision making, perhaps a little bit harsh, but I think a version of that has developed over the years for any number of reasons. So I guess I'm not just happy with soldiering on when you combine that with some of our own monitoring, the Citizen Insights monitoring report that has been changed a little bit in recent years, but basically, you know, if you look at the rolling quarter from 2022 to 2025, you have public satisfaction with Auckland Council's performance around about 18%, 18, 19, 18. And I think, you know, despite the best efforts of everyone, a large part of that is basically to the structure that doesn't work. It hasn't captured Aucklanders. There has been no proper review of it, so we've had a CCO review, we're dismantling Auckland Transport, Panuku's bit the dust, but the fundamental structure remains intact. And I think it could be better. It was imposed on Auckland, so Auckland had no say in it at the time. There's been no proper review, independent review of it, yet we somehow think that a number of these disturbing democratic trends in terms of representation, interest, engagement of our communities is clearly not working. In fact, it's on a downward trajectory despite everything. So in instances like this, you either just sort of tick the box and soldier on, confine yourself to a representation review that changes around, you know, a little bit of this ward or a little bit of that ward, but the fundamental structure is there. It's not being challenged. I think we're losing an opportunity here to signal that there could be a reorganisation. And when I look at it, and certainly the feedback, and part of the reason I'm speaking out is because this has become a very strong feedback I've got from the local boards that are in my area in terms of addressing the structure and what they would like to put up as something, and without getting specific, more akin to the Royal Commission, which in essence would reduce the numbers of elected people by half, but would give the half that are in far more power and far more ability to represent their local communities, or their local councils as they're called. So I guess the question I put up, a rhetorical one, I'm speaking to myself as usual, is, well, if not now, when? When then do we actually address this fundamental structural issue that I think has a large part to do with a number of the challenges we face, because it just kicked the can down the road? Who's going to do it? It's none of the governments. The successive government's been in. They haven't touched it with the 10-foot barge pole. They're just leaving Auckland to it. So I guess, Mr. Mayor, that's what I'm saying, is that we kind of forego that opportunity in this. I think Auckland could be a lot better. And it could be a lot better through some version of what the Royal Commission actually recommended. And I think it's up to us to do it, because these other people in Wellington aren't going to do it. So I won't be supporting it, because basically it's not addressing that fundamental issue, and that the local boards in their own way have hinted is what really is of interest to them. We haven't really dug a bit deeper on that, and I don't think that's going to result in better outcomes for Auckland in the years and decades to come. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Gillen, please.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I actually concur with a lot of what Councillor Watson has said today. Look, ladies and gentlemen, as you'll be aware, what is before us is a reorganisation review and representation review, and the reason is due to the convoluted way the two pieces of legislation intertwine and overlap, and the whole thing actually needs a legislation overhaul. What we were proposing was a reorganisation review followed by a representation review, which is the order that the Local Government Commission recommended. Last time we looked at this, the governing body unfortunately kneecapped the process by only doing a representation review, which made it difficult to respond to boundary changes in both wards and local boards when they're supposed to be as in sync as possible. Now, to kick it off this time, late last year, we asked local boards, we requested that local boards be asked what issues, if any, they would like included in the reorganisation portion. But I think there's been a misunderstanding somewhere, as the majority of local boards, as we can see from the feedback, said that the review shouldn't just be of local boards, that the governing body should also be reviewed, even though actually the scope was wide open. If you look through the feedback, it tends to be the local boards that are experiencing significant growth that want things to be looked at a local board level, especially their boundaries, which is why I'm concerned that if we keep pushing this out, we'll compound growing democratic and representation problems. I just want to read out some examples of local board feedback that we've received. Henderson Massey does not support a reorganisation of Auckland Council's local boards as proposed by the report, but requests a review of Auckland Council's local boards together with ward boundaries and governing body representation arrangements to ensure they remain fit for purpose in the future. Upper Harbour Local Board do not support progressing with any local board reorganisation or changes to local board arrangements in isolation from an independent comprehensive review of Auckland Council's governance structure in its entirety, including all local boards, governing body, as reviewing local boards alone risks entrenching existing governance shortcomings. Kaipatiki Local Board. The Kaipatiki Local Board supports a reorganisation, however this should incorporate Auckland Council's governance structure in its entirety, including all local boards and governing body. We believe that reviewing local boards alone risks entrenching existing governance shortcomings. Faux Local Board oppose the proposal to progress local board reorganisation, but also request that if a review is required, it should be of Auckland Council's entire governance structure. Devonport Takapuna request the review includes a full investigation of the full Auckland Council shared governance model, including both the governing body and the 21 local boards, as well as decision-making power and budgets. So it does seem to me that there's desire for a review, but just not only the local boards. And actually, that is what we were suggesting originally. Now, some local boards have also put forward specific issues in the areas that are to do with growth. So we have the area of Drury is having problems. Whitford and Beachlands is having problems. Old Flatbush, Milldale and Ara Hills. These are all identified in the report. And then I'll also draw your attention to the LGC recommendations that we had last time, which included the Albany North Shore boundary, which I'm most familiar with, and it is in breach of the 10% representation rule that we need to deal with at some point. There's also been a lot of concern raised, and as Councillor Watson mentioned, that Auckland structure doesn't resolve the intent of the Royal Commission on Auckland Governance. Mr Mayor, today I won't be putting forward an amendment, even though I strongly believe that we should be proceeding with this, because I know there isn't the support for it at this time due to the upcoming transport reforms, even though it is possible for Auckland Council to do more than one thing at a time. But I will be voting against B and urge that anyone who believes that we should be tackling these overdue democratic and representation issues to also vote against B. Thank you.
Councillor Turner, please.
Right, thank you, Mr Mayor. The two speakers before me summed it all up. I just concerned the overall picture. When beginning of the last term, we were talking about fixing Auckland, we were talking about empowering the local boards, giving them procurement and upscaling them. So that was a review of the local boards, I understood, with a amalgamation of some of those local boards. And then you add to things like that the fact that local boards are going to become road controlling authorities. We really don't need 21 road and control authorities. 12 would be much better. So I agree with everything everyone said beforehand. I think this is slowing a process that I thought we'd got into at the beginning of last term. So I do realise that we're in amongst so much change. Everyone's sinking under change. So I will be voting for it, but against B. Thank you.
Councillor Ferry, please.
Kia ora. Just a couple of points to make. Firstly, I would actually support a broader review. However, that's not the decision before us. The decision before us is direction on progressing a local board reorganisation for the 2028 elections. A broader review is unfortunately something that's not on the table for a variety of reasons, including, as has been alluded to, the upcoming transport reform. So it's not a good time to be changing our governance structure when we're about to change who decides what in a way that will have a massive impact on people's workloads and the role. The other thing to note is that the process from last term did start down, and a number of us were obviously on the Joint Governance Working Party at that time, but also a number of new councillors took part in that process wearing local board hats too. We did start down the track of trying to do a representation review and a reorganisation for local boards simultaneously, and this governing body, or the previous governing body, but the governing body nonetheless, decided not to progress with the reorganisation. As we worked through it, we discovered there was no simple model that had consensus or even a plurality of agreement to take forward on local board amalgamations. It's actually really hard to get this right. And I think the local board feedback that points out that we need a review of governance arrangements as a whole is correct. That's not what we have to vote on today, but also actually the resources involved in doing that are significant. We've talked about the idea that the Local Government Commission could perhaps do that work in the future. Perhaps that's where it needs to sit, because the other thing that it would require to get to something similar to what the Royal Commission recommended, for example, would probably be one of the options, is actually some law changes. So some of the change that I'm hearing people speak to is not actually something that could be delivered through the reorganisation process anyway, because it would require law changes. The Local Government Commission have said they don't have capacity. They're dealing with a whole lot of regional government changes. I think it is something that we should probably raise through the Auckland Deal conversations, that it's potentially timely to review this stuff, and I'm not afraid of that. But this can't do it. Voting against this
makes no difference. And I do think we need to be careful about how some of that local board feedback is being represented. My understanding, for example, is that Henderson Massey's concern was actually primarily their long-standing advocacy for single wards, where instead of having two ward councillors for some wards and one for others, they actually wanted to see one member for each ward, which would actually mean we had more wards. So I think we just need to be a little bit mindful here. If local boards give feedback for a range of reasons, seeking a review is not the same as saying they wanted to progress a local board reorganisation, and I think the majority were very clear they don't want to do that at this time. Kia ora.
Thank you for that, Councillor.
Apologies for my late arrival, Your Worship, but look, I'll be supporting this, and I'd make the point to those members of local boards who are concerned that, that the option here for reform or a reorganisation would be limited only to the boards and not to the governing body, and perhaps that we need to address the wards and the governor and the councillors too, is to remind that we actually have gone through regular reviews of our ward boundaries, our representation arrangements for the governing body. Actually, the outliers are the boards. So if there is a concern that the scope isn't wide enough, we've been through this process from a governing body perspective several times previously. And Councillor Ferry is right. We actually have tried to address this previously. And actually some of the strongest resistance to this actually came from the boards themselves. So I am not comfortable, having just gone through a representation arrangement prior to the last election, to go through a representation arrangement for the 2028 election. It happens every 2 cycles, as I understand it, and perhaps the approach that needs to happen is that the next time there is a representation review for the governing body and the wards, that the local boards are part of that, and we try and organise that at the same time. I'm not sure that I'm necessarily confident about the Local Government Commission driving that work, to be honest, and I would imagine that the moment that happens, there'll be a whole lot of Aucklanders, and in particular local board members, who'll be saying, why aren't we controlling that? Anyway, Your Worship, I'm happy to vote these recommendations. Thank you.
Good points. Thank you very much, Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's interesting, the Auckland Council and Auckland councillors in the past have always been willing to review and reorganise local boards, or at least consider that, but never has never shown the same willingness to, if you like, look in the mirror and consider whether the Auckland Council itself needs to be reviewed. It's easier to review and reorganise it seems, but never to review or reorganise me, or rather ourselves. Now, this is an interesting exercise. We've gone out to the local boards, and in terms of reorganisation or review, reorganisation essentially, 4 actually support it. 4 of the local boards, 4 are absolutely against it, but the overwhelming majority are actually for a local board reorganisation, but, and very sensibly, only in conjunction with a reorganisation, or at least review, of the rest of the council, which makes a lot of sense. In the corporate world, you know, big mergers of companies always go through a 10-year review to see how it all worked out. You know, did it achieve the goals that were set down for it at the beginning? And the people of Auckland were promised a lot of things about the new so-called super city in terms of cost efficiencies in particular. And clearly, Auckland Council has failed to meet those goals quite significantly. And so I guess when the local boards say, yeah, you can have a go at reorganising us, but it's got to include you. And suddenly everyone's gone cold on that idea. But I'm sure the local boards who are close to their communities are aware of public feeling. And in the end, it's what the public believe or want that should be the determining factor. And I don't think they've really been asked. But in terms of the surveys we undertake, and I congratulate the Chief Executive for keeping these going, even though the results are not particularly flattering for the council, it's very important data. So the quality of life and citizens' insight monitor surveys indicate that trust in Auckland local government, public trust, is at 27%. Confidence that the council makes decisions in the interests of the public, it's 29%. And belief that the public has any influence over decision making, 34%. And those figures, interestingly enough, straddle the metric that Councillor Watson talked about, that only 29.4% of qualified voters bothered to cast a vote in Auckland at the last local body elections, way below virtually anywhere else in the country. So therefore, that's a signal that when the local boards, two-thirds of them say to us, reorganise the whole show, reorganise the whole council, and we'll certainly support that. We'll support our own reorganisation, but we need to reorganise the whole council. Of course, the problem for the council, apart from political willingness, is that there isn't really a pathway to do that. But of course, we are in the hands of the government of the day when it comes to this, of course. But we talk to the government about all sorts of things. Auckland deals, big deal. But when it comes to things that really count, here is what we should be doing. We should be talking, I think Councillor Ferry mentioned this, that we should be talking to the government by saying, hang on, it's 15 years, guys, and you'll put a rates cap on us for your own good reasons. We have cost problems for our own good reasons. Obviously, it's not working as promised, and therefore, let's work together on a reorganisation of the whole Auckland Council. It's time that we did that, and just because there's not an easy laid out manual to go through this, we need to lead the way, because given the signals coming from the public and the abysmal turnout at the last election, people didn't vote with their feet, they voted with their recycling bins, unfortunately. And that's something that we should take very seriously indeed. So in some ways, the whole exercise is a waste of money and it's taking us nowhere. But what we need to take out of it is let's start listening to we asked the local boards a question and they gave us an intelligent answer. We need to listen to that and act on it. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Councillor Bartley, please.
Thank you. I'm always worried when we talk about smaller numbers, cutting the numbers of local board representation or local elected representatives numbers, because it means that it favours those with the resources to compete for those votes, and it means a dilution of voices that are traditionally underrepresented at this table and our local board tables. So I'm not keen to support this. I don't get people come up to me in the street and say, can you do a reorganisation review or a local board representation review? What they are saying is, can you sort out the traffic? Can you make sure we don't flood? Can you make sure we still have a maunga and a river so that our kids can fish out of that river? So I think we have bigger fish to fry, and I agree with the local boards that say, well, what is actually broken? I will support this because I don't want to see us
Thank
waste
you very much,
time on
Councillor
a
Bartley.
reorganisation.
Councillor Baker, please.
Yeah, sorry, I won't take long, but, and apologies for being late. I'll be supporting this. I do agree with Mike, though, that at some stage we do actually need to look at the whole thing, and it's, we had this discussion in the local board when I was on it, gave feedback that we should actually be reducing numbers and et cetera in local boards and all sorts of things. We were the only ones, and I think that was the time when turkeys don't vote for Christmas became a really popular saying. And so I agree with Mike that at some stage, but Auckland's very dynamic at the moment. I don't think now is the time to be doing any of those because things are changing so quickly, and if you take down south and Daniel and Matt's ward and my ward, there's people coming and going and all over the place, so now is not the time. And the reason I was late is I was sitting there talking to the local board about transport reforms, and Shane and I are doing every single local board, and they are confused about that enough. We don't need to be chucking something else into the mix. So I think we should just leave this, but we always need to have the opportunity and the willingness to look at representation.
Okay, thank you for that. My experience during the last election is this is not a burning platform. I don't remember anybody raising that. They raised exactly what Councillor Bartley said. Fix the traffic, fix the water, stop the flooding, blah, blah, blah. The local board's role will be strengthened through the transport reform. And if we were talking about a public issue about reorganisation politically, we have right at the moment a raging bonfire in Wellington because the public of New Zealand do not select the leader of New Zealand. So if anything needs to be reorganised, it should be down there first up. We did give local boards more decision rights and budget responsibility for community services and infrastructure. They're all busy, and we've got better things to do to spend the money this year than doing this, so I'll definitely be supporting that. And I will be moving this, and it's seconded by Councillor Henderson.
Division.
And a division's been called.
A division's been called. Yeah, there we are. Look at that. Someone's beating you to it there, Alf. It must be a South Auckland thing. Righto, we're going to have a division on this, and we'll see if we can do better than 15-6 this time.
Thank you, councillors. We are going to do this electronically via resolve. You are voting on the 3 clauses in total as you see them on the screen, and we will start the vote now.
Use your story recording against at the end if you want to vote against one of them, or you want it, is it just a vote of everything?
Yes, no, that's correct. You can record your opposition to one of the clauses if you need to.
I'm going to record against B, because the other ones are just received.
Record against B?
Yeah.
How do I do this? I just ask you to record my opposition to B, wasn't it?
Consider changing your password, please.
So Duncan against B, please. Mike, do you want to record yours against B? Do you want to record yours against B?
Yeah, record against B, please, Sandra. So what do I press here? President voting?
Yes, you are. But you will have missed the vote now. And you can pass out. So the blue one.
Not voting?
Yep, so no.
Oh, what?
That one?
Yeah.
And that one.
Save.
Yes.
Okay, very much.
Oh, there you go. Oh, it's gone.
It's gone again.
Okay, so
Record my vote
Against B, you better.
against B. B.
Yeah.
Yeah, but what about the whole?
Yeah, so vote for it, but record against B.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
We're like the local boards.
All right, thank you, councillors. We have every vote recorded. So the motion is carried 19 votes to 2, and we have some recorded opposition to clause B. Councillor Burns, did you want to change your vote? Thank you.
Right, thanks for that little bit of excitement. We're going to go on to transport reform, which we are doing. And we are definitely doing transport reform, and we're doing it big time. And this is our first key decision as part of the transport reform. It's going to be passed by the end of the month, I've been told. So we're getting this approved now to let staff get on with the work. Council has resolved this on the 31st of March and had the chance for changes, and they're still coming a bit. Councillor Baker, I'm going to move this. Would you like to second this, Councillor Baker, if you're paying attention? Second this one. Thank you. I was going to talk to you a bit as a person. This is a big document. It's very good, but it's not quite perfect. We've got to get on with it. And I'd like to support this with the ability to have a little bit more chance to sort of tidy up a few little bits there that don't quite come across as strongly as they should. These sort of documents get prepared in a certain type of language, and they all look pretty good until you work through them. And we had a document like this for the City Rail Link, which hasn't worked all that well. There's a couple of bits in here that aren't quite strong enough in my view. Is it's got to seem different to staff and the public from day one. It's not quite hammered home enough. And standardisation is absolutely central. And so it does mention that, but we've got to upgrade all standards, and this has to be compulsory. And the last bit is that there's a lot here about responsibility and accountability, but it seems as though the people who are going to be responsible and accountable are us. One of the problems at AT is that you can never find who's responsible for doing something. And so the staff have to be obviously responsible. Whoever's in charge of something has to be blooming well responsible. And so I think we're going to have it slightly changed so that there is the ability to do, it's all here, but it's just a little bit of wordsmithing and work required before it becomes a public document. And I think the Chief Executive is quite happy with this, if I understand it. I'd like him to talk about that, but hopefully we can pass this with the ability of the Chief Executive, myself and Baker, we often have a little bit of editorialising in some of our other things. I want to get on with it. I'm not going to change the substance of it, just highlight those little bits and pieces there that staff, not just us, have to be responsible and accountable. Staff have to be responsible and accountable as well. That's a bit of a drawback. I think we all want to see that this works. If there was a burning platform in the election, it was definitely, this is what the public want. No question about that. Okay. Chief Executive, just say something a little bit about.
Yeah, look, well, just to note, I'm very comfortable that we refine the document a little bit further, that we've got, as we quite often do, have a process for some editorial changes with input from the chair of the relevant committee and the mayor. So, you know, that's all good. I and unashamedly asking for your support to sign this off today. We have a truckload of work to do in this space, and momentum is really important. I would commend it to you as a sensible bit of direction and framing of the change. But we're right in the thick of this now, and looking for your support to keep the momentum up. But I don't want to cut across Steve and Toby and so on. So,
okay, Toby, over to you and your team.
Sorry, as the Chief Executive said, we're at a really exciting time as we create the two organisations that will support the communities, that will support the elected members, and also deliver great outcomes for Aucklanders, as the Mayor has mentioned. So this strategy and reform, it's more than just transport functions. It's about how Auckland Council and the new Transport CCO are structured and work together for Aucklanders. It's definitely going to be a new way of working, as the Mayor talked about. It's about being closer, it's about being more integrated in terms of the work that we do, and it's going to be community focused. We will be different, we'll be stronger together, we will ensure delivery excellence that shapes Auckland's transport's future. So by approving this today, it means that we can get on with it and we can get it done. So as I say, today is a big milestone, and we're really excited about getting this document over the line.
Thanks, Steve. Just one or two things from me, and then we're really happy to take questions on the report, and we'll just treat it as read. I'll just also introduce to my right Craig Renshaw, who's the head of the Project Management Office inside the Joint Council and Auckland Transport Transition Program team. So Craig and I have probably run point on the content of the transition strategy, so happy to get into any more detailed questions when that comes. So just a quick reminder, the transition strategy itself will be a requirement when the legislation does go through, and the latest that we have on that is we expect it towards the end of April and commencement shortly afterwards. So it's a requirement that governing body approve this strategic component that sets out the pathway from the current state to the future state, and so that's what we've been working with you on and are bringing to you today for your approval. As an overview, it provides that pathway from here to there. It talks to the transfer of powers to the governing body and to local boards and the functions to council, and it sets out the council's program approach to delivering that change, and it names the decisions that elected members will be presented with throughout the transition period. So really the transition strategy is how will we spend the next 6 months delivering the change, and then it also looks to post-implementation, what does a post-implementation period cover, including we have in there a 1-year review, and then required by the legislation a 5-year review of the new arrangements and support structures. The document starts with the objectives that the governing body set as the Budget Committee last year, and discusses the benefits that will be delivered through the transition period. It describes the design outcomes, so we have to make a reorganisation of Auckland Transport into a focused public transport CCO, and we need to integrate those important non-public transport functions into council. And the document sets out what we're trying to achieve, both structurally and in our way of working, our operating model, and getting to some of that closer ways of working with the CCO that Steve just mentioned. It also covers the scope of the program, how we'll measure our activity, sort of project management principles, which we're happy to talk to as well. And so collectively, it becomes our roadmap, as I say, in detail for the next 6 months, and then beyond in terms of the post-implementation, really making the new structure work for the council's objectives. We had a workshop, members will remember, mid-March, and then we shared the transport transition strategy and draft at the end of March, including with Haukura. And just to mention, we appreciate Haukura's feedback as well, and made some changes in the transition strategy to reflect that. And we also shared with the local board chairs and had some feedback there as well. So really that's it. The next steps, if we have the transition strategy approved here today, you know, that really sets us up for success. We're able to report against this. You'll see reporting back against the progress of the transition strategy through that period. And work is actually underway. As Councillor Baker mentioned on the last item, he and Councillor Henderson have been attending local board workshops for the Auckland Road Classification Framework, which is already underway, working with local boards to get their feedback on that framework. And soon, towards the end of April, early May, we will be sharing a proposal with staff for the new proposed structure, and working through a process there to get their feedback and making decisions as we build out both the organisation and its operating model. So with that, I think I'll just pause, hand over to the chair, and then happy to take any questions and can help you navigate through the document, referring as we go. Kia ora. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Fletcher's got a question.
No, I wish to speak. No questions.
Councillor Henderson has a question.
Yeah, thanks, and thanks for your work. It's fantastic. Just got a cue around advertising policy, because I've since been approached by some concerned residents and groups around our transport assets being used to promote fossil fuels. And so I'm wondering, firstly, where the policies around advertising will sit as part of that transition. And then I suppose the second question is, if it does come into council, do you foresee that we're going to have a conversation about that in the future?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. So you're right, there is a long-term contract in place that sells advertising in bus shelters under very strict conditions, which is controlled by the Auckland Transport policy. And we are currently just working through that at the moment around looking at all the policies that we do need to review as part of this. So we're still working through that.
Thanks, really appreciate that. Thanks, Mayor.
Good question. At a time when we've got sudden increase in costs of diesel, which will put pressure on everything, of course. Councillor Patterson-Hamlin.
Thank you. So, my apologies for not bringing this up in the workshops for a start, but I'm just wanting to ask about disabled people consultation. I'm aware that AT has its own version of this, structurally, internally, because it's quite specific, that form of consultation. At Council, we have the Disability Advisory Panel. So will we continue to have both? I guess my actual question is, which part of this strategy does it come under? Because I couldn't quite figure it out. Is it the program management section of the document, or is it coming out of something else? Yeah, which bit of this does that fall under?
I think if I'm understanding your question there, we need to go through a process of transferring the functions and the staff structure that supports those functions into council, and then retaining some at the future transport CCO. There will be differences in the way, and not just for engagement, in the way that teams and the frameworks that they adhere to, in the way that they undertake their activity. As the structure becomes clearer, and I noted in my introduction, you know, we'll be consulting with staff soon, we will be able to more clearly identify what needs to change given those future arrangements. So the transition strategy doesn't describe all of those frameworks and the changes that will take place. That's part of the program approach to what we refer to as change management. One of the appendices at the end, if you are looking for a that's testing me. Might be an L. Appendix L has a change management section which focuses on communications, engagement, experience of staff, and talks a little bit to identifying the processes that need to change over time. So I suppose the answer here is we have 6 months. We need to make any changes in terms of integrating the way that Council and AT currently do something when they come together under council. We need to make changes during that period so staff are really clear about what's expected of them, what framework they're adhering to, and how they kind of go about their work. So in terms of the section that would apply, I think it's there in Appendix L, Councillor.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's just because the way that that's structured in council is different to how it's structured in AT, so it comes under two different categories, which is why I wasn't sure if it was under that partners and stakeholders section or whether it was more under the staff section, because there's a difference there, I suppose. But that is helpful. Thank you.
I think I'd just add, Councillor, that we'll have a look in the final wrap up of this document and just make sure it's tidy, and rest assured that we'll make sure that that focus within the policy and transport strategy area, within the operations area that we're absorbing, and within the PTCCO, that it continues to have that visibility.
Good question, thank you. Councillor Filipina, please.
Atamare he mana, good morning, Chair. Atamare e koutou katoa, kai mahi me ngā kai kaunihira to the councillors and staff. Gentlemen, my question is going to be a finance question around the transition. If transport officers need to be, or there's more transport officers need to be employed, where's that responsibility around the employment and the budget? Is that with Auckland Transport or with Auckland Council? Auckland Council. So if there is a requirement for more transport officers, that decision is where? With Auckland Council, with the committee? So please, yeah. So it sits with Auckland Council, not Auckland Transport.
Sorry, Councillor, we think we misheard you. Were you referring to parking officers or transport officers?
I'm talking transport officers.
So currently, obviously, transport officers are employed at AT. The function is proposed to stay with AT inside the public transport focused CCO. So the employment relationship would be through the future transport CCO, but there is an important step where in the legislation the transition director's role is to identify the required roles of both organisations. So the first being what roles are required for council to deliver its new functions, and then what roles are required for the new future transport CCO to deliver its functions.
Toby, sorry to interrupt, because you originally said that transport officers were going to be with Auckland Council. Currently they're with Auckland Transport. The hiring of more transport officers, once we've gone through transition, where does that lie, and where does the budget lie, and where does their employment in regards to the mahi they do, where is that decisions, where are those decisions going to lie?
Thank you, Councillor. Sorry, we did put you wrong initially, mishearing you. Transport officers, transport focused, public transport focused, transport CCO. Their employment would sit there post-transition. The budget for the salaried staff sits inside the CCO. Ultimately, those funding arrangements are set through the long-term plan.
Okay, so any funding to get more transport officers, because I've been on this for a while, but that is a discussion through LTP. I just want to get my head around that so I know where to advocate and lobby.
Yes, you would influence that through your decision making in the annual plan and LTP, and probably influence it as well through statement of intent direction to the board.
Kapai, kia ora. And I'll join the queue when ni whakaro, Chair.
Councillor Ferry, please.
Kia ora, thank you. And this is really useful, and I've also really enjoyed the workshops and found them very useful in clarifying my own thinking, but also being able to communicate that and talk that through. I've got a question that I see a significant risk in terms of the change to elected members' workloads. And I wonder if that was something that I didn't see it from a quick look through the risks list. Obviously, that potentially looks different when we're managing the transition to what the future state will be. In my experience, having been elected at amalgamation in 2010 to a local board, was that it did take a number of years to work out what the right level of workload was for local board members in particular, and where things sat, and having the right staff support. So what's sort of the thinking around managing that particular risk around elected member workload and upskilling fast enough to be able to make decisions in a timely fashion?
There are a number of elements related to that. Thank you for the question, Councillor. And they are in the transition strategy itself. I might ask you to find me the page if you will, Craig. At an overview level, yes, the role of elected members is changing, and some of the expectations for effort will be changing. As part of a separate process, the council will support the remuneration authority in considering whether there are any impacts that kind of trigger something particularly into the local board space. I see you following along there. From a program perspective, we've kind of got three things in train. So we're trying to think hard about induction for elected members as they come into the role, which will be most notably in the next election cycle, but also trying to think about taking that content and creating packs of guidance material. The team is working really hard to synthesize quite complicated information into what's our current role, what is changing, how will decisions kind of come across the desk of an elected member, what roles and responsibilities look like, some of which has made it into the transition strategy because it's made clear by the legislation. Some of it will progress as the transition period progresses, most notably around which roads, through the road classification framework, which decisions are delegated to staff, which will bring as part of decision making in sort of May, June, I think it is from memory, again in the transition strategy. And finally, it's through the staff support structure, sort of 1, 2, 3. So the staff support structure will go through the proposal, consultation proposal mechanism that I mentioned as kind of will initiate soon, and we'll get feedback from staff about whether that is workable in the new sort of reality of supporting elected members with greater decision making. We'll also include in that at the 1 year review mark for the transition program a check on whether that guidance material, induction material, and staff support model is working, given the volume of decision making. This is sort of another element, may shift and change once constituents are aware that decision makers are changing as well, and also as elected members become more familiar with sort of their powers and decision making. So from a risk approach, we're aware of that change, and we take those steps to support elected members through that.
Thank you. You've preemptively answered my next question, which was about the staff support for elected members and the change, so that's great. I just have one other thing, which is, so on the list of powers, not powers, that's the wrong word, of areas of control, really, which is quite early in the document, under the public transport CCO, it mentions engagement around public transport. There's no comparable list for engagement around other transport issues for the non-CCO part of what comes over to council. And I wondered where consultation is going to sit, because it seems to me that AT has had their own consultation processes, and it may be appropriate for those to sit with the transport CCO when they are very specific to public transport, but then we run up quite quickly against the network optimisation function, which will sit with council. So acknowledging it's probably early days, are there any thoughts here about how that's going to work? Because I think that's going to be a really important thing for the public. There's a high level of scepticism about AT engagement and consultation. I tend to think that's probably overstated in terms of people's scepticism, but I understand where it comes from. We've got an opportunity here to potentially reset things a bit. with the new CCO, with whatever consultation they're doing, but also with any consultation that we will be doing as well. So any sort of thoughts on how that might shake out?
I think you've spotted one of the things that we will check to Phil's comment there about just making sure everything does line up. You spotted that probably by omission we haven't included that there is engagement on the non-public transport functions that were transferred to council, and council has that functional leadership approach where we have a centre of excellence for public engagement, and then we have parts of the organisation that deliver the sort of delivery specific engagement. And you know, I would imagine that in reality, a lot of the engagement that the PTCCO and council may need to undertake on joint projects would need to be kind of led in that fashion. It is calling out in here that some of that on the ground engagement, and if you think particularly in terms of changes to services and AT's model of kind of fronting that with the public and having people there as navigators, that's retained within the public transport CCO. So probably the answer to your question is there's not a great deal of detail to make that work just yet. It almost goes to the question that we had from Councillor Patterson-Hamlin around some of the change management approach through the transition period. Just for completeness, because I can't help myself, the Auckland Regional Transport Committee will make a determination about how it engages with Auckland on the 30-year transport plan. So that's actually a slightly different function to what's happening here, although probably in practice there would be some leaning on council, I would imagine, given our secretariat together with the Ministry of Transport kind of function. So I hope that gives you a level of detail. Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Thank you for that. Councillor Hills, please.
Kia ora, thank you. This is really great, and thank you for taking on a lot of our feedback and the Mayor's feedback and kind of covering most things off. 2 questions is just on process at the moment. So a lot of this is around trying to hold things together. My priority is trying to, continuity is key, but I will say that I generally have good responses and communication from AT and on projects, investigations. That does seem to be slightly dropping off, and some of the feedback I've heard through the grapevine is that there is starting to become a lack of staff and people able to sign things off. So I just want to know how we're addressing that, because I imagine 6 months from now that might become quite acute. So, you know, had really good service, but I can see the staff that I'm talking to having real trouble getting the information that is usually far easier. So I'm assuming, you know, there'll be a hire freeze or there'll be people deciding to do different things. How are we trying to address that? Maybe it's more for Steve or Phil, I don't know. But I do worry what it looks like by the end of the year.
Thanks, Councillor. I might comment and then ask Steve as well. So this is one of the risks, you know, retaining people through this change process. At a high level, the best antidote to this is to move as quickly as possible and provide as much clarity in order that we don't create the situation where we're going to have, you know, more gaps in staffing, and particularly senior staffing. We have been monitoring that quite carefully. There is sort of certainly a degree of turnover at quite senior levels within Auckland Transport, much less so down below that. There will have to be a level of potentially secondment of people in to cover business critical roles and possibly some contracted in resource. We've just been talking about that as recently as yesterday. So we've got strategies around that. Obviously the aspirations to make sure that the wheels don't come off in terms of business as usual activity, continuation of projects, that we don't lose traction with the capital program and what have you. So all I can say is we're quite wise to that risk and strategising around it with Auckland Transport. It's not as substantial. No, what am I saying? It's not such a big issue at the moment that I think you need to be really concerned about it. But clearly we've got some months to go until things are permanently in place, so it's important we do have strategies around it.
Cool, thank you. It
I
might
don't
just
know, Steve is sort of located some of the time down in Auckland Transport and very aware of what's happening on the ground there, so Steve.
Yes, thank you, Phil. I think Phil summarised that well, and just to give you some assurance that it is definitely a live risk that's been talked about at the sponsors group for the transition, but also the Auckland Transport Board has this as an item that they discussed frequently to ensure that they have the resources to deliver the outcomes that we're seeking.
Yeah, thank you. And it wasn't to try and turn this negative, it was more, are there options to fill with temps or get different delegations, temporary, whatever, just to do as much as we can to be flexible. My other question, and it is more strategy coming in probably long term, but I have discussed this with Healthy Waters leadership and different things around how quickly or over time or through the LTP that the transition, some of those teams will be with Healthy Waters. So I think one of the big success stories maybe out of this will be the linked up approach of all infrastructure. You know, if you think of resilience, the way we do renewals, linking in with Healthy Waters from the beginning. Are we looking at that early so that can kind of mesh together by the end of the year for the LTP? I know that's mentioned in here a little bit, but I would just love to see that kind of work linking in, and I think it'll be a real kind of highlight that it's one, at the moment it's like drain, catch pit, road, camber, all kind of has different approvals. If that was meshed together within the next year, that would be quite a phenomenal change for Auckland.
Yeah, so just to be clear on where we are in the process, so we've signalled the likelihood of those activities coming together within the Auckland Council structure, but there's an important step to go through. There's a change proposal that we're shortly going to communicate the release of in the first week of May. So it's important we go through that process, that we do justice to staff feedback about those changes in the organisation design and the structure and where stuff's located. So, but that is the working thesis, and absolutely I would expect to see a level of integration across those activities once it's in place, and probably starting sooner than it, physically going live at the end of the transition period.
That's great. Thanks so much. Awesome. Great work. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Lee, you're next. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There'll be a certain amount of confusion in the public mind about the arrangements, and I think I take note of on the second page of the report, the bill, second bullet point, refocuses Auckland Transport as a public transport focus council controlled organisation. That's great. But I am concerned that constantly in the report and in the verbal presentation, officers keep referring to the transport CCO, the transport CCO. Why not the public transport CCO? Because that is why I think, if we're honest enough about it, why we're having these reforms. Because AT has actually, in essence, failed the public, to be frank. Otherwise, the government wouldn't have touched it. But anyways, that's a point. I request officers to start emphasising the public transport focus. The second point, in regard to the status of this new organisation to replace AT was exceptional, and it's been noted in the report. The arrangements are exceptional in regard to local and regional government in New Zealand having a CCO in charge of all transport functions. But the status of AT was also exceptional in that in the Local Government Auckland Amendment Act 2009, it actually embedded, entrenched by legislation. So unlike normal CCOs, literally council-controlled CCOs, AT was not a council-controlled CCO. And I just wonder, under the new Act, will this public transport CCO be genuinely council-controlled, or will it have its own statutory status like AT does? Will it be like a Panuku, which we can fold back into the council if we so desire, or will it be like AT, which will require legislation to make any changes to it?
First of all, I think your point about it being called a public transport CCO is dead right. And I think the document should be changed to reflect that. It is a public transport CCO, and thank you for Councillor Lee for that.
Thank you, and just...
Do we know what the status is?
Yeah, it's much more like AT than Eki Panuku, so it would be a statutory CCO with the way the bill is drafted currently.
Okay, so...
I think...
Okay. Just...
Phil may have more to add to my answer.
Another point. I take it that the harbour master function will come back to Auckland Council. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Just a final detail, and I guess it may be too early yet, but in terms of putting staff in place, obviously councils get a lot of complaints about transport matters. When do we start redirecting those complaints, roading related, to the council? Is there a mechanism or a timeline for that public interface to come into operation?
And this in part touches on Councillor Ferry's questions around the support to elected members. So I think the important thing to understand, we're going into a 6-month transition period. The council can elect essentially an effective date whereby all those powers transfer, staff employment arrangements will sort of go live, if you like. The program team is working for technology to be mapped across on that one day, essentially. And it's at that point in time that the powers and responsibilities and therefore complaints resolution processes or pathways to elected members about advocacy and so on, to your point, would sort of become real. But we do need to, and this kind of goes to the change management approach and just kind of careful planning towards the end of the transition period. We can't have that happen as part of one big bang where we haven't kind of tested that and supported, in particular, elected members in their new roles. So towards the end of the transition period, with some of the decisions that are called out as having been made May, June, July, which enable us to kind of build out what those pathways may indeed actually sort of look like, we'll be able to provide support and then perhaps even test some of that, change some of the public-facing material that points people in the right direction and so on. So you should see some changes to the support and explanatory materials tested with you towards the end of the period. And then in terms of that sort of being real, it all kind of goes live at the end of the transition period. Yeah.
That is quite an important function and role and process where elected members sit interfacing with the public with the many and varied complaints about AT, quite often roading related broadly. And so one of the problems with AT, and perhaps one of the reasons why things have happened the way they have, is that the response to complaints is kind of very disembodied, not particularly people-friendly, and so I would hope that the new council organisation department is aware of that and is aware that we need to be a little bit more friendlier rather than having somebody with a one name who may be in the country or not, almost responding by remote control. I just think that's something that we need to work on if we're going to make a measurable difference in the roading area. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor. I think that's the end of questions. And, oh no, Councillor Bartley has a question. My apologies.
Oh, no, thank you. I didn't click the button. I just wanted to ask, so it seems to me like we're going from Auckland Transport, it's coming into Auckland Council, and the issue that we have is we can set the direction as governors, we can set the policy, but where we fall down is the implementation. So how is that being factored? Because a lot of the focus in the transition document is on our decision making and making sure we have the information to make decisions. But in terms of keeping the public on side with us and making sure that we're making the right decisions, it's the implementation that is key. So I think we need to factor in somehow, I don't know if it's more oversight for us as governors, but how are we making sure we're keeping track of implementation?
So if I hear you correctly, you're asking about how we're keeping track of how successful the implementation is of the changes that are being made. So there's currently threefold to that at the moment. One is actually referring to something that Councillor Hills mentioned as well. Through the 6-month transition period, we're going to be setting up some measures and monitoring of how we're maintaining business continuity and service continuity through that period. Then from the effective date of change that Toby referred to, that's when the decision making will be effective, and we'll start measuring and monitoring the benefits that we were seeking of reform as they're outlaid in the plan. And we'll particularly use those from a review perspective at the 1-year review date and the 5-year review date, as well as through our ongoing monitoring processes as an organisation. And that will cover both the functions and services of the PT, Public Transport CCO, and Council in terms of what the transport functions and activities that are moving to Council.
Maybe if I just add one other thing. So I think you're right, Councillor. Focus of today, most of the focus of the document is about getting it done and shifting the powers across and making the change kind of real. And then it's from the end of the transition period, if you like, where the real work begins and the post-implementation can take place, to Craig's point just now. That's why there's a benefit framework in place and a 1- and 5-year review that will be focused on the objectives that councillors have set for us. So, a focused public transport entity that's really delivering well, council taking ownership of its new responsibilities, trying to integrate with land use and transport, because that'll be what's possible in the new model, and then the improved partnership with central government. And then you've got the kind of on-the-ground element of, is delivery still working? Are we measuring our performance? Elected members have oversight over that. And so through mechanisms like our reporting mechanisms to governing body, you would see that ongoing delivery that communities are sort of experiencing on the ground. So I hope that gives you some confidence that, this document is describing our approach to the next 6 months and beyond. It's in that oversight role in that new future state that you're able to do some of what you're asking about, having oversight of that delivery.
Okay, thank you. And because I just keep thinking of the removal of rubbish bins from the parks as an example. We set a strategy, we set a strategic direction, but then when it was implemented, we were all kind of shocked. And then we had constituents contact us to put the bins back, but local boards had oversight. But then we really weren't aware of what was happening. So I hope we learn from that, because it sounds like we're going to go into something like that, but on a much more bigger scale, with a little bit more ambiguity around our roles.
Thank you for that. Righto, now we're going to move to debate, so you guys can retire. Please, thank you for your contribution. And the first debate is from Councillor Philippine and then Councillor Fletcher. Oh, well, we go the other way around. I'm quite happy with that. But we have Fletcher and Philippina in the order that they decide. Okay.
Well, we both begin with F, but I would say that this, in speaking to this is far the furthest from an F grade. Anyone who knows me well knows that it has been transport that has really been the driver for my participation in local government. And from the privilege of serving on the board of Auckland Transport between 2010 and 2016, it was abundantly clear to me that the model that we had was holding us back. And so I was one who tried to advocate to Mayor Phil Goff. This reform was necessary to bring a sharp focus into Auckland Transport being the public transport agency with the accountability. And at the beginning of the first term under the Mayor, when Max Hardy was the Chief of Staff, we had an away day where we talked about these things, and this came through very clearly, the articulation on the need for this transport reform. So this is a day that I think we should celebrate. This has been a major impediment in people's expectations about amalgamation, that the monster that Auckland Transport was and all of the complexity around it has held us back. So I today really want to extol the progress that we've made on this, and where it came from Max, and then with the confirmation of Phil Wilson as our CEO. I mean, he really understood this issue, and the careful detail that has gone into this. I'm thrilled to bits with his choice of Steve Mutton as his transition director. I'm really pleased that we have a really good interim board in terms of Auckland Transport. We've got some good people there, and even that decision that they took yesterday for their acting CEO is one that I applaud. So for all of you, and I'm not undermining the complexity of what needs to happen. This is a very detailed piece of work, but I, for one, am really celebrating it. And while the Mayor chose to remove me from all transport leadership at the beginning of this term, I am not going to show petulance here, because I really welcome this. I think that this is something that needs our fulsome support, and I'm really, really pleased with all of the staff who have brought this to the point that it is, and I very rarely give the Mayor accolades, but he picked it up at the beginning of his term, and I genuinely think this is going to really unlock all the opportunities that we've looked for, bring greater clarity in terms of accountability and direction setting for what we do by way of investment into public transport and that ongoing functionality. So for anyone who is nervous about supporting this and can just see problems, yes, there will be problems, and yes, it is complex, but it's absolutely necessary. This was the surgery. If we had a sick patient, we'd be sending them off to hospital, and we'd basically send Auckland Transport off to hospital, and what you're seeing now is going to be the way forward and a much healthier Auckland. So my congratulations to Max, to the Mayor, to Phil Wilson, to Steve Mutton, to Toby, and all of the staff that have worked on this. I really welcome this today, and I implore you to support it. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much for that. Councillor Philippina.
Tēnā koe he mana. I won't go over what Councillor Fletcher has said. All I'm really going to say is number 32 and 33 of our report, which is Māori Impact Statement. My whakaaro on that is on page 20 of the Transport Transition Plan. I don't normally would read out things that I prepared, and I'm not reading out anything that I prepared, but I want to acknowledge our staff in regards to this transition plan, and also the fact that we're moving forward, and wish to just read 2 paragraphs of page 20 of that transition plan. And it's under transport reform and Māori outcomes. Transport reform provides an opportunity to strengthen how the council group can give effect to Te Tiriti o Waitangi and deliver Māori outcomes through a more integrated, accountable and outcomes-focused system. This transition plan aligns with Tāmaki Order 2025 to 2027. Tāmaki Order, the Council's Māori outcome strategy and performance measurement framework, which sets the long-term direction for how the Council group works with Māori and delivers outcomes across Tāmaki Makaurau. When this issue around law reform and statute, I was inundated with calls from our Māori community, mana whenua, mā waka, and their concerns around what happens around our obligation. I'm pleased to read that in that transition plan that it actually is going to be an enhanced. So congratulations to the transport transition plan, and congratulations to those that have brought it to this point in regards to the ngā mihi. Kia ora.
Thank you for that. Councillor Newman, please.
Your Worship, it's very interesting the way in which the debate has moved on the Auckland transport space. I'm having a quick review of the report that was prepared by the panel that was set up in the Gough era. It was led by Miriam Dean, and I remember that review because I gave my feedback to the panel that I felt that Auckland Transport was the outlier, that to have an unelected road control authority with no political accountability back to the ratepayers of Auckland was just wrong. And I felt a bit Robinson Crusoe at the time because I was about the only one that was saying it. I think others might have been saying it, but I was quite outspoken about this. And I think that some of the recommendations of that panel were just plain wrong. That it was considered that there would be an unsustainable burden on the council if we went down the reform path to bring these functions back within the council, which is patent nonsense. And you've picked this up, you've led this. I don't think that the previous mayor would have agreed with you, but you've led this. You've got a mandate to do this, and I'm pleased that the government is coming on board. I welcome these changes because they are utterly consistent with what happens elsewhere in the country. And I think for anybody who would suggest that we have to have this standalone entity, they are out of step. Aucklanders will welcome this. Thank you.
Well said. Councillor Watson, please.
Yes, thanks, and take on board the comment from the CEO, Phil Wilson, that you're looking for an affirming directive here, so that we're too far down this path. So I think that's good. It's all hands to the pump. I guess just the one thing I would say, just in my customary concern to see that things are recorded fairly in respect of looking bad. I certainly, for one, have appreciated in the time I've been in council, a lot of the projects that Auckland Transport have brought together. And I think as I travel around Auckland and look in virtually every single ward, there's been some significant advancements, particularly in the public transport space with, with bus terminals, with the rail network, with, cycle lanes, with any number of things. There has been a lot has actually been delivered if you reflect on the last 15 years, and much of that often building on what the legacy councils had put in place and the ARC. So I certainly am not one of the people who look upon the reign of Auckland Transport as being one of sort of overwhelming negativity. That's simply not true. Unfortunately, there have been people both at local and national level who have realise that one of the most popular things you can do is to attack Auckland Transport. That you see a spike in the polls is to run them down, and there's been any number of politicians have used that, and that's not really been a fair reflection of what's happened on the ground. As some of the other councillors have said, you know, there have been, I think, some fundamental failings that would have greatly aided their cause in terms of responding in a timely fashion to controversies as they arose, and that has been a cultural thing. It's been something that has probably done them more damage than anything else. So we're to hope in the great transformation that there is a change to that, but I guess there is a challenge too, because large percentage of people are bought into this new organisation. So in the change that's occurring, there is a real challenge there in an organisation that has been restructured to death to kind of retain the goodwill and motivate people then that are doing essentially the same job, only under the auspices of the council. So I guess, Mr. Chair, when it's all said and done, the proof of the cake and all that will be in what comes out the other end. All the usual glib cliches and kind of jargon won't last for too long unless there's kind of meaningful change on the ground. And as I said, I think, looking in retrospect, that Auckland Transport wasn't served that well in its advice. The last term of council, we had a complete change of leadership, of boards, of chairs, of everything. You couldn't have had a better opportunity in terms of personnel change, not regime change, but personnel change at the top to affect that the kind of outcomes that you're looking for. So it's to be hoped that this transition, which has been widely supported, as the Mayor has quite correctly remarked, from Aucklanders, will up the game a bit, and that everyone will be the better off for that in the short and long term. So thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor. Deputy Mayor Simpson.
Thanks, Mayor. Mayor, this is a transformational day for Auckland. You can complain about Auckland Transport, you can talk about it, or you can fix it. And I want to give my words today by way of a thank you to you, because you have delivered a fix for the problem that so many Aucklanders have told us that they have with having an external organisation that is not accountable. CCO, it's almost an oxymoron, wasn't it, when it came to Auckland Transport? So my words today are to say congratulations, we've got there, it is a transition, but we're actually on the way. So the complaints are over, we're doing it, we're fixing Auckland and bringing transport reform, and I think it will be one of the most important things, or one of the major things, that this political term will deliver by way of results. So thanks, Mayor.
Thank you very much. Councillor Lee.
Yes, I don't want to rain on the parade, but I'm intrigued with the wording in the report, in the document here, that the transition document, why reform is happening. And actually, I could have borrowed this for use in the previous item instead of writing my own stuff, but I'll just skip out the words transport. Reform is happening because the current system has not delivered the outcomes Aucklanders expect. Auckland's size and population give it challenges that are distinct within New Zealand, and the current arrangements have not adequately addressed these challenges. I left out the word transport just to make the point. Obviously, we're talking about AT here, and it's all quite true. Reform aims to address two major weaknesses in the current governance arrangements: a lack of democratic accountability in transport decision-making, with the unelected Auckland Transport Board making most transport decisions across strategy, policy and delivery, a role that is undertaken by locally elected members in other regions. And so what we are saying here is we are going to put an end to all of that. Well, not quite, unfortunately, because in my view, the key role, the key responsibility and the majority of the budget goes to public transport. And that is where, which is the most visible part of it in the sense when you've got projects like the CRL, electrification and so on. And so the lack of democratic accountability in public transport decision making will go on. So not really 3 cheers from me anyway. That is a problem. We have to be careful about talking up a big game here, over-promising, and given the constraints, under-delivering. I would make that point. Our work is still ahead of us, true, especially, strangely enough, in terms of roading and so on. AT and its contractors do a good job. They're very expensive, but that's the system we live in. In terms of public transport, it's failing. It continues to fail, and therefore, despite we having yet another CCO which is not controlled, and I believe there'll be no, unlike Auckland Transport, there'll be no democratically elected members allowed to be on the board. That's not actually a great total victory, councillors. I wouldn't be popping the champagne bottles just yet. So therefore, in terms of this reform, it's a half pie, P-I-E, or half PAI reform. Therefore, we still have our work cut out for us, and in terms of the CRL, and in terms of making that a success, which is not a given what we're hearing about the services that AT or the public transport CCO that replaces it have in mind, that is still a challenge ahead. When I was chairman of the Auckland Regional Council, I didn't oppose, and I have to confess that, I didn't oppose the super city reforms. I was mistaken about that, to be honest with you, but I certainly oppose setting up a non-democratic AT organisation, and I still oppose a non-democratic public transport organisation. This doesn't exist anywhere else in the country, and so this is a half a step forward, a half a victory, but be careful about overselling it, because what we are criticising here, a lack of democratic accountability in transport decision making, will certainly apply to the new public transport CCO, unfortunately. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hill.
Kia ora, thank you, Mayor. We're not obviously debating transport reform today because we've debated that. This is the transition. So just want to once again acknowledge the work done here to listen to us and to get it, on its way. I think a lot of us don't realise the amount of work that goes into both sides of the coin and trying to bring it together. I do want to acknowledge, because and she's not here today, but Stacey Vance-Putton as new CEO of the new public transport, interim CEO for this organisation. And I think it's our first woman CEO in Auckland Council history. I might be corrected on that, but I think so. She is a phenomenal leader, and I know she will do a great job in this space. You can talk to her about any bus route, any type of bus, any ferry, any service, any route, and she will know what's going on there, why it's going on there, what the delays are, what the patronage is like, and where it needs to be addressed. I find her a very, very, very good person, and I hope she continues into the future in this space. So I feel very safe with her coming on in that leadership role. So thanks to those who chose her. On this process, I think this is also only going to work if we and the local boards jump on board and show the responsibility we have. I think Councillor Watson mentioned the political thing to do is bash AT and you get votes or get support. Well, I've tried my best not to do that. I think that if you want something changed or done, go to the source and try and get it fixed. The community are tired, the community are busy, they just want us to fix it and not moan about it. So I hope that what doesn't happen is that instead of blaming AT, we blame the new staff member or the new manager or the new operational division, because I think we're at risk of doing that. A lot of people that have come before us and some that are still elected want power, I think, but don't necessarily want responsibility. So we've got to make sure we take responsibility, and I think that's probably the most exciting thing here is that we will have more responsibility, but it takes all of us to, A, help protect the organisation through, because it is going to be hard. As my question earlier, there is already a bit of dip-off of ability to get outcomes because of staff change, of uncertainty, of transition. So I think we do need to step up and give those officers a break, whether they're within council or within Auckland Transport or the Transition Authority or whatever it's called, because it will be hard. It's going to be unsettling for the next year, maybe 18 months. So we just need to give people a break and try to move forward, because I think the future is exciting, but only if we get behind it, support the process, and also understand how bloody difficult it's going to be for not only the staff members, but the people who work with the transport department, or whatever it's called, and the new CCO, but also the public to try and understand it. They will just keep coming to us and local board members and whoever to complain or request or find solutions for the thing, and they won't really care where it sits. They'll just want us to deal with it. So I really like the work that's being done with the transition. I feel safe that a lot of things are being considered, but there'll be many things we all miss until it blows up in our face. So it's up to us to try and contain that and try and get the best outcome without, throwing, without criticising people throughout this, because it is going to be tough. So I think this is good, and thank you, Mayor, for your leadership on this. We can just complain forever, but actually we're doing something about it, and I think it's a good way forward. Thanks.
Thank you for that. You summed it up quite well. We'll have a little bit more options than just sending a text to Mr. Kimpton. Councillor Gillen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll keep it brief, but I did want to thank you and thank everyone involved in bringing this forward. This is a long time coming. I do believe that the creation of Auckland Transport was a mistake back in 2010, and the reason for that is, and it's borne out, the reason for that is that the role of the expert is not to be making decisions on behalf of the people, but it is to advise the elected members to make the decisions. And so where we have decision-making in the hands of non-elected people, that is where we encounter problems from a democratic point of view, where the public butts heads with, in this example, Auckland Transport, and it is something that we need to be looking at across all of our CCOs and rolling them back even more than what we're doing at the moment. I want to give one example with Auckland Transport, and look, I do have to say that over the last few years, particularly under the CEO Dean Kimpton, there has been more listening to local boards. Prior to that, it was a brick wall, but also with the public as well. And just one example near my place is it took 6 years, a petition, multiple resolutions of the local board to finally get about 2 metres of yellow lines at one intersection because there were issues being caused. And that sort of thing is just unacceptable, and that is why the public have been crying out for years for Auckland Transport to be reined in and for that decision-making to rightly sit with their elected members. And so what our role is now is to ensure that these changes are bedded in properly, that we don't just rubber stamp all of the policies and the delegations and things as they come over from Auckland Transport, but we actually look at them again and unpick them where need be to ensure that our local boards will actually have the ability to make decisions when the community brings concerns to them, and to make sure that at a regional level the governing body does have the ability to make these decisions, and it's not all just delegated away again and we end up in the same situation. So thank you very much everyone for getting us to this point.
Okay, that's very good. Thank you, Councillor Gillen, for that. Righto, it's been moved and seconded. I'm going to propose that we move this. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. The contrary? Carried. Well, I think that's momentous, and I have to say that's a great relief. I've been 3.5 years attempting to make a step like this, and I feel quite good. Don't be scared. Every other council does this. Just bizarre. Now, we're now after 12. There's another item coming up which is to be held in secrecy. And so I'm going to move us into secrecy and then go to lunch. So you can have a secret lunch. And so those of you who have a sausage roll don't have to tell anybody where it came from. So seconded by the Deputy Mayor. All those in favour of going to secrecy, please say aye. To the contrary, carried. Righto. We have a secret lunch now, thank you.